So, welcome back everyone to another Geeks and Barbells episode of BookTalk. And I wanted to discuss something that I don't see really talked about much in terms of video commentary. It's more so something I see a lot in the comment section of many a YouTube video, and that is the idea of perspective, more so in the sense of when a book is being written, you have a character, either a male, female, and people seem to get really caught up in the fact, and this happens predominantly more in fantasy novels, that many fantasy novels are written in a this is very important, white male's perspective. Now, I think people associate this with industry sexism, racism. People like to jump to the conclusion of an ism very, very quickly these days because it's the hot new trendy thing. Everything has to be like the worst possible reasoning. Now, this is not me saying that there has not been, and still to one degree or another is, racism and sexism in the world, that it doesn't exist within industries, for sure, 100%, no denial there. But that being said, many people just don't seem to grasp this idea of the author's perspective and how a book is written. Because people seem to really want to have more representation within novels, but yet as soon as someone represents another point of view, then they'll shit on them for like representing them in a wrong way. That you're a white woman. Why the hell are you writing from the perspective of a Latina woman? Or if you're goes on and on basically. And what I don't understand is this, as someone who has written quite a few like shorter stories, and I'm working now on a book. For example, my two main protagonists are a white male, who the majority of the book is through his perspective, and also the secondary character, although I'm hoping to develop it even more, is actually a Latina female. Now, why am I doing it from those two perspectives? Well, it's actually really simple when you understand how an author in general writes a book, especially a fiction novel. And that is, we pull from our own lives. I am a white guy. So it is pretty normal that my understanding comes more from my perspective. And so when I went to create a character, the first character I could think of was a white guy. Because for many of us, especially in the first book, we are sort of writing ourselves. I mean, the characters we're creating are either based off of aspects of our own personality, ideas and thoughts and things that we have in our head that are sometimes minority representations of how we think. So for example, I love fantasy. It's a huge part of my life. There's huge amounts of things that I would love to do, entire creations of my own mind that I would love to bring into reality if magic existed in this world, but it doesn't. So when I write out a story, it is me going into that character. And the same way that Latina female is actually me still. It's a character of my own creation, but she's actually based off of and will be very much associated with someone in my life who I spent a huge amount of time, who was a Latina female. The woman in my life who I had the most experience with was a Latin female. And so when I think about, originally the character was actually going to be a Latin man, and then I wanted to have a woman because I felt like it would complement more, and it's nothing about a relationship. There will be no relationship, an intimate relationship between my two characters. But I wanted to have that little balance between the two. And when I started thinking about more down the lines of a Latina female, I started thinking about that person from my past, and I'm like, that person had these little aspects that I think would be really cool if I like exaggerated this or brought down that and switched this around. So I'm pulling from my own perspectives, my own life, But at the end of the day, even though I'm pulling from another person who I've actually met, 99% of the character is solely going to be from my perspective, which is why the majority character, the main character, is a white guy, because I'm a white guy. And that's not racist, that's not sexist, it's just I'm a white guy. So I'm writing a white guy. Can I write a black man or a Asian guy? Or yes, of course. I can simply take my character, keep his personality exactly the same, but make him be from Korea. I can absolutely do that. And I'm sure I could make it work, but it's easier for me to write it from the perspective of a white guy because I'm a white guy. And I know this pisses off a lot of people, but in the United States and Canada, where a lot of fantasy novels that we know, okay, the most well-known fantasy novels, come from many times American or North American authors. And the majority population in North America is white people. And so when 70 or 80% or more of your population is white people, half of which is going to be, well, most of the time it's 50-50 or around there, men, it's not that uncommon that you're going to have a lot more books written by white dudes, because there's a lot of us here. It's just how it is. This is not racism or sexism. It's just simple statistics. It's a numbers game. And it's also a rational thing. If an author is a white guy or a white woman or a black female or a black man or etc., 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 I would expect 90% of the time, if not more, that those people are going to write a character of their own ethnicity, something they understand a little bit more, because that's their own perspective. I would never go to, if I met a female Chinese author, I would never blame her if almost all of her characters were always Asian females, or specifically Chinese, or maybe even if she's going out. Like, it would make sense to me because that's what she understands the most, and so that's gonna just go on. She's not doing it because she hates men or that she doesn't want to bother with male main characters. It's just she's a Chinese author, and she would like to write a Chinese female character. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And I just bring this up because these days, and I blame this a lot on social media, it is just people want to complain about everything. And as soon as they go to complain about something, and they give it, there's no shades of gray. It's always extremes. There's never a fair accounting of how things actually are in reality. I hear so many people talking about any kind of subject, and they immediately want to look at it as black and white. It's just one extreme or the other. There's never a middle ground. There's never a talk of just normal human biology. There's things that just make sense when you just look at it about how human psychology is, and how, you know, a lot of the worst possible things that have happened in the world have to just do with basic tribalism. It's just because we lean towards things that are normal to us, things that look similar. We are a pattern recognizing species. Okay, so it is very normal for many people to gravitate towards things that look, sound, and seem familiar to them. It's just how we function. Now, the beauty of, you know, living in the year 2020 is that because we understand so much, because we have access to so much education, so much knowledge on the internet, because we have so much mingling of people, at least here in North America. I mean, it is still not very common in most of the world to have as much ethnic diversity. Even though we are majority white in North America, we have a massive amount of ethnic diversity comparatively to most countries in the world. As someone who's traveled a little bit, like, trust me, we have a lot of diversity here comparatively to other countries. And so it allows us this new perspective. It allows us to learn. And yeah, sure, we're still in the infancy of that. we still mess up a lot. There still is racism. There still is sexism. There still are problems, hard problems that we need to deal with. But people also need to appreciate how well we're doing. And people also need to just stop jumping to conclusions about things. If an author decides to write a book and everybody is a certain ethnicity, it's not because they're not trying to be diverse. It's just because they don't want to. They decided to do a place where everyone is ethnically the same. I will never ever blame an author of any gender, of any ethnicity, who decides to create a world, fantasy-ish or based in modern reality, and decides to just hyper focus on one group. It's their choice, and they're probably doing it because it's easier for them to put themselves in that mentality. It is not, and this is the main crux of what I want to say, it is not easy to write a story. That's why very few people do it, and that's why even the people who do it, most of them do it badly, and many others who even do well enough to be published or gain some popularity don't gain much. That's why it is so difficult to make a living as an author. There is very, very few people who have made a good amount of money that they can actually survive off of just being an author. And so when we go and we shit on these people's work just because they don't fit our narrative of what they should have done, like you should have more of these kinds of people, you should have more of those, why did you represent your male characters or your female characters like this when you should have done it like that? That's just your own opinion. It's just you who wants to have that. But in that case, just don't read that book. If you're looking for the kind of style of novel that has that diversity or whatever, there are lots of books like that. Lots. Go for that. There are styles of books I don't like. I don't force myself to change how it's written. Now, again, if we're talking about industry issues, I'm definitely not an expert on this, but I've heard quite a few stories from people who talk about how for the longest time, and it's slowly starting to change, that there was issues of gender issues and I don't know if racism played as huge an issue as sexism did. I mean, there simply hasn't been that many female authors and now I'm talking specifically in the fantasy genre comparatively to men. Now, is that completely because of sexism? I think it definitely plays a part. I think the larger part has to do with because for the longest time, fantasy and science fiction were kind of looked at as the geeky man kind of thing, and that's been changing the last 10 years now. Now it's more like acceptable to be a geek, and as it became acceptable to be a geek and a man, well, now it like opened it up to all the geeky girls out there who are coming into it, and now they're like loving fantasy and loving science fiction. They have access to it. And again, I'm not saying these people didn't exist before. Of course they did. But I think there was a bit of a closed-mindedness of it that had nothing to do with the industry or sexism per se, more so the fact that just culturally it was already not considered an acceptable thing to waste your time reading fantasy or reading science fiction. And obviously with how fucked up things were between men and women 50, 60 years ago, so there wasn't women really doing that. They were being told to do other stuff. So, I mean, it is sexism, but it's not sexism in the industry of books per se. It's complicated. I think that's the most important point to get from this, is all of this is complicated when we're talking about industry and that kind of setting. But when we're really just talking about someone shitting on a book because the author did not make their main characters or more of their characters be of a diverse setting or different genders or different ethnicities, who cares? First of all, I love books, but it's just a book. Who cares if the author didn't put enough diversity in it? It's the setting they've decided to make. And again, and I will stick by this as someone who started to write, it is phenomenally difficult to write a book. It is much easier and makes it an easier task. Sorry if you can hear people bashing up top. It is phenomenally easier a task to write a book from the perspective of someone that you are familiar with. As a white guy, it is much more familiar to me to write from the perspective of a white male character. Not because I don't like or don't want to write from the perspective of other people. And when I am going to write from the perspective of other people, I'm going to have to go outside of myself and pull from people I know. Okay, and that is a much more difficult thing, because then you're taking other people you know and then smushing it into your own version of that character, which is a lot more of a complex procedure. On top of an already really complex thing when you're trying to build up a whole world and a story, and there's so many working parts to a book. So I think people really just need to kind of take a step back and give people the benefit of the doubt, because many of the things people ascribe to very extreme negative things like racism or sexism many times just have to do with simplicity and ease when someone's trying to do something that's very, very hard. And people do this in every aspect of life, in multiple subjects, and it has nothing to do with an ism. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on it. If you disagree or agree or think you can flesh out more of the idea, or I'd definitely love to hear from people who've been in the industry or who know more about the industry, who can really point out in those instances how sexism and racism affect that, because I'm totally down with that. I fully understand it. I just don't like it when people start ascribing those kinds of things to an author just because the author didn't make, more Asian people in their books. That makes no sense to me. So, like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you're thinking, and yeah, that's about it. Love y'all. Have fun.